Hi, my name is Jane Drexler, and I teach philosophy in the Humanities and Languages Department at SLCC. And I wanted to share some thoughts I've been having and also maybe try to contribute a little bit to helping our community stay connected during this time. There's a poem that I heard a long time ago by the extraordinary poet Pablo Neruda, where he was lamenting where he wished that he could only make a broom. That is, that he could offer something practical, something concrete, that he could use his hands during difficult times, but that all he had were words. And that poem has stuck with me for a really long time because philosophers tend to feel that way too sometimes. But I'd like to suggest that at this particular time, I think poetry and philosophy actually might have a lot to contribute to our well being, to our ability to process, to feel connected to each other, and to find our way forward when the path is super uncertain. We're living in a strange moment where the crisis is immediate, yet it is also quiet and slow moving. So we actually kind of have more downtime than we're used to. We are lonelier, and that makes us more anxious. We avoid human contact. We like actively move away from each other rather than come together. And of course, we do all of that so that we might mitigate some of the insurmountable burdens that might be imposed on our medical and social institutions. And that is right and that is good, but it is also hard and it might wear us down more than we think it's going to. So maybe now is the perfect time for some poetry and philosophy. So, what I'd like to do for however long I have something to say and for however long people want to hear it is to reflect on some of these moments philosophically. I don't really know how it's going to go. I'm making it up as I go along. But I figure a good place to start is by talking about the name that I've given the series. It's called Porch Philosophy. And that name really comes out of an insight that I had been coming to as I've been learning more and more about these two schools of philosophy that come out of this particularly crazy time in ancient Greek history called the Hellenistic period. And I'm not going to tell you what that whole scene was about, although it's super interesting and you should check it out. I'm not going to talk too much about it except for to say that it was filled with crises and uncertainty, political and social upheavals. But also a bunch of developments, like super cool developments in science and in art and technology. But also it was filled with suffering and death. And in that context, there are two philosophies that really arise. One of them is called Epicureanism, and the other is Stoicism. So the Epicurean philosophy said that you should seek your own pleasure. This is a crazy world, but don't worry about it. You do you. And so Epicurus had started a school of philosophy, and that school was called the Garden. And it's actually a pretty good metaphor for the kind of way of life that Epicureanism was promoting. It was this garden that was like walled off and secluded from kind of the chaos of the public. And it's a place where people could escape to and live, work, and think together. So, in effect, Epicureanism responded to this chaos of the world, the insecurity of the world, by withdrawing and being protected in the garden from the external world so that they could explore the interpersonal and inner world and work on friendship and serenity and freedom from worry. And actually, here's a super cool mosaic. It was just recently excavated, like in 2016, and it's of the Hellenistic period, and it perfectly captures this Epicurean mindset. So here's this skeleton, this person who has one life and is totally chill and relaxed, like lounging, holding a glass of wine, and they have bread right there. And in that Koine, in that Greek language, there it says, "Be cheerful, live your life." That's the Epicurean philosophy. So that's one approach to dealing with the chaos and insecurity and suffering of the world. And then there was also Stoicism. Like the Epicureans, the Stoics were responding to the chaos and instability of the time by turning the search for freedom and well being inward by cultivating character. And like Epicurus, the first Stoic, Zeno, came to Athens to start a school. But he did not get a piece of land that was isolated off. He did not build a structure or a wall to separate it out from life. No, Zeno held his classes in the middle of the agora, in the middle of the public square, underneath a colonnaded structure that is called a stoa. And nowadays we would translate Stoa as basically porch. And so literally translated Stoicism is kind of porch philosophy. And the more that I thought about that, the more beautiful and poignant it became. Theirs is a fatalist philosophy with a deep appreciation that they can't control the world around them. And even so, in the midst of all that chaos and uncertainty, suffering and crazy, they refused to withdraw from the world. They thought and they moved and interacted in the middle of the agora, in the world, not apart from it. And I just love that idea, like standing on their porch, as if to say, this is life. This is the situation, and we are here, and we will face it with grace and integrity. Porch philosophy then comes from this place of feeling overwhelmed, of feeling run down and disempowered, but it intentionally refuses to retreat from the world. So that's what this series is about. Committed to sticking with this crazy world, of staying connected, and of philosophizing from the porch and not just the garden. Interestingly, and before I go, this week I also discovered a second reason for philosophizing from the porch, and that is that I experienced my first earthquake, and I found it to be quite frightening, quite frankly. Many houses in my neighborhood are damaged, and it was quite scary. And seriously, like, what bad timing. And I was playing this little quarantine game, this Jimmy Fallon thing, My Quarantine in 6 Words Twitter thing, just playing along. And the one I came up with was this one: Coronavirus says stay in. The earthquake says get out. And the absurdity of that conflict for me hit comically, but it also hit hard because for days we didn't have a safe place to go. And I caught a glimpse of what refugees and other victims face when terrifying circumstances compel every fiber of their being to flee, and a counterforce keeps them inside a precarious structure with nowhere to go. In those first few days, when neighbors weren't quite sure where the safe place to be was, like, I saw a lot of neighbors spending time out in front of their houses, not quite inside, not quite outside either. And it occurred to me that I think this too is what porch philosophy is about: a straddling of two worlds, neither one of which is particularly safe, but with a commitment to both of those worlds nevertheless, a sense of place and time that we're unwilling to give up, even in the face of suffering. So, this is Porch Philosophy, and this was the first episode of a series of unknown length or depth, but it simply says, we are here. Thanks for joining me.